Welcome back. Today we're going to tie Kelly Galloup's Conehead Wooly Sculpin. Honestly, I prefer the regular Wooly Sculpin on this one, but for those of you guys fishing some faster water or where you need to get a little bit more depth, or if you're fishing floating lines, you know, a straight Wooly Sculpin with just a deer hair head's not going to cut it. You're going to have to go with a little bit of weight. So the Conehead's a good way to go on that. I like the profile of the standard Wooly Sculpin a little bit more than I do this Conehead. I like that big full Sculpin type head that you'll get from that deer hair. But as for the reasons I already mentioned with the weight, sometimes this may be a necessity. So we're going to go ahead and tie this. This is on a 4X long MFC 7008 today. It's a little bit on the longer side. Probably a size 4 3X long hook would probably be the sweet spot for the length on this one, but this'll do. I mean, you can go with whatever size you really want. Actually, I mean, I prefer the 3X long hooks, but we'll use a 4 today. Let's see here. We'll just get a couple of wraps of 15 thousandths lead wire on here just to kind of hold our cone in place. Just get a couple of good wraps. Go ahead and pinch that and get rid of the excess wire, and then I'm just going to throw a little bit of glue down at the front of this, and then we're going to push that all the way up to right behind the cone. So we'll just push that up, secure our cone in place a little bit better. I don't get too awful carried away on this like I do with some of the others. Like you look at the Tenet 2, some of the other Conehead ones, the Honey Hole, anything else really with a Conehead, even if you're doing a straight woolly bugger. I like to get that head just a little bit more stabilized, or the cone I should say. But with this, we're going to be packing deer hair right in front of it, so that deer hair is going to push against it. Not a huge deal if it's not as secure as some of the other patterns. Let me just make sure that we got good contact there. That looks pretty good. Grab my scissors here, we'll get some thread down, we'll get started. Gel spun 100 for our thread here, and I just want to get a couple of good thread wraps on that lead, and then I'm going to work this to the back, just getting the thread base down. Go ahead and trim that off, and I'm going to go right between the point and the barb of the hook. Actually, probably we're going to go right to the barb of the hook, hang our thread right there. That's going to be our tie-in point for our tail. And I'm going to start on this one with just a single plume of cream Marabou. Just going to use these tips on this one. Set that off to the side. And I'll measure this out. It's going to be the length of the hook, and that's about it because I'm using a 4X long. I don't want to go too far beyond the length of the hook on this one, or else that tail tends to get a little bit too long, and one, it throws the proportion of the fly off slightly, and two, it can have a tendency to want to wrap around itself on the hook and everything. Not such a big deal on these single hooked flies. The articulated ones are where that may run into being an issue. So I'm just going to take that forward, clean that up just slightly. And then I'm going to go into some gold holographic Flashabou. Just take a couple of strands of this, 2 or 3. It looks like I got 2 here, so, oh, no, there's a third. There's a third. So I'm just going to take a couple of strands of that, and there's a couple of kinks in those, so just get rid of that. And then run this as some internal flash. Just a couple of loose wraps, work it forward, so then when you double this over, you have some real estate to get that in line how you want it. So then we'll take that, trim it right at the same distance that we have for the one that's on my side, and then we're gonna tone this one a little bit. We're gonna go with this tan and brown barred Marabou from MFC. Let me see here. I like that one. It's a little bit thicker. We'll take that and we'll get this in tied in over top of our cream. So now that we have that, we've got our little toner sitting there. I'm going to just get that secured into place. And before I advance any further on that, I'm going to throw in my counter rib. This is just some extra small copper wire. Give myself enough to work with here. Just set that wire in place, and then I'm going to loop this around. I'm going to double this over right here and get that secure. Now while I'm back here, I'm just going to go ahead and tie in our body material. This is just a regular chenille. It's got some flash in it. You can see the sparkle and everything. That's what I'm going to use today. I was going to go with the UV ice dub, but I'm going to go with this chenille. It's just I think the original was done with either a straight chenille or a cactus chenille. I can't remember. I'd have to look, but I want to say that it was done with a just straight chenille. But then over time, you know, we started getting some advancements and everything in the materials, and I think that's when the flash got introduced into the body. So then we're just going to take and tie in those cotton strands, advance this forward. We're going to capture our Marabou here. Just add a little bit of bulk, smooth out some of these tapers. Right there looks pretty good. Alright, so you'll notice that I have this tied off right here. I'm going to leave probably a little less than the quarter of the length of my hook. That forward is going to be collar and then the deer hair head. I'm going to leave that there. If you want to, before you start tying these, if you're not worried about getting that, you know, that cone head a little bit more secure, you can start your thread right there as a reminder not to go past these. But after you tie quite a few of them, you're going to have a consistency point. You'll likely be able to just eyeball it and get your consistency right. But when you're first starting out, it'd probably be better off to either make a mark with a marker there if you have full coverage with some thread, or start your thread at that point and don't allow any thread forward, just so you have a visual reference of where you're going to be starting your deer hair collar and the head. So now what we're going to do is we're just going to take and wrap our chenille. Make sure that you've got good coverage right there on this back side. You don't have any gaps or anything. Get that first wrap. Just pinch your tail. If you tied it in properly, it's not going to shift on you, but every once in a while you get a little too western on that chenille. No matter how good you tie in your Marabou, it's gonna wind up giving you a little turn. So I don't know if I'm kind of right in between there as to what I want to do. I'm just gonna tie one. I'm just gonna spin around there one more time. If I have to, I can cover that up some with some thread wraps if I want to go back a little further. But there is the body, and I'm just going to get this back on the card here before I forget about it and it goes all over the place. We'll get that out of our way, and then I'm going to go with some of this Grizzly variant Schlappen. This is tan, and what I like to pick on these, typically I'll go with a saddle instead of the Schlappen. The Schlappen gets a little bit heavy, but I like to pick through these and find something that's kind of a hybrid between Schlappen and saddle. I just like the way that it looks a little bit more, and I want to find something, like I was saying, that's close to a saddle. And also, I don't want really long fibers on these. Now if I'm doing a dungeon or something like that, I'll lengthen those fibers out, but I'm just going to give it a quick test right there. That's about as long as I want those fibers, toward the back half at least. Now obviously as I go toward the front, as I go to the back, these are going to be getting shorter because we're tying this in reverse. So I'm going to go ahead and tie in this Schlappen right behind, or right in front of, I should say, my chenille that I already have in place. And then we'll half hitch this, set this back up in the cradle, and then we'll run this to the back. I'm going to use some pliers here. I probably could get away without doing it. I definitely could. That's a long enough fiber, but or a long enough feather, but I'm just going to hold on to that with some pliers. It helps me keep my hand out of the camera a little bit if I have some distance from it. So now all we're going to do is just make nice consistent wraps to the back. Just nice even spacing, even pressure all the way back. Before I clean those up at all, I just want to counter wrap this, make sure that you catch that feather right there, and then I'm just going to counter wrap this. I'm going to rip it right through, trapping as little as possible, and then we'll tie off this wire. So now we have our Schlappen locked in place with the counter wrap on the wire there. Set that in the trash, and there we go. Make sure you peel off that tag end, and I'm just going to fluff out these feathers slightly. Get that out of the way. Oh, there's my Conehead moving. Should have used something bigger than 15 thousandths, but I didn't want a ton of extra weight on it. Okay, there you can see we have our tail, our body, and then our Schlappen tied into place. Last thing that we're going to do on this is we're going to form the remainder of our head. So what I want to do is just clean this up a little bit, make sure I have a nice platform to tie on, and I'm going to form the collar on this. Now the collar is just going to be like the cougar, like the dungeon. This portion that we're going to use is strictly a collar. We're not going to try to incorporate this into our head or anything. We're going to take a nice chunk of deer hair. We're going to make a good bulky collar on this. This is just natural deer hair, not dyed or anything. Body hair, I should say. No belly hair for this. I don't want a ton of buoyancy in the deer hair. So I'm going to take a nice good chunk of this. You can see the amount that I have up against the fly there. That's a pretty healthy chunk of deer hair. Knowing that I'm going to drop a little bit when I'm cleaning this up in the brush, or in the comb I should say, and then I may drop a touch when I stack it. But we're just going to drop that into the stacker. Get in there. Set that in. Even up your tips. Make sure they're nice and even. And then this is the big thing on this, is measuring out the length of your collar. If you're using a 3X long, the measurements that I go with for the length of my collar is I always aim between the point of the hook and the barb. That's where I want my tips to end. Being that this is a 4X long, if you use that same measurement, your collar's going to look really long. So my max on this is going to be the point of my hook. That's going to be the absolute max length that I'm going to allow that hair to go back to form my collar. If anything, I'm probably going to be a little bit shy. I'm probably going to go between the halfway point and the 3/4 mark on the length of my remaining hook. What I mean by that, the remaining hook, is discounting the cone forward. So now that I have all this, you can see I'm dropping a little bit there. Just get those tips, make sure that they're nice and even. And I'm still dropping a little bit. Now I'm going to measure out my tips right there. You can see if I draw a line straight down from my tips, it's going to wind up being just shy of the point of my hook. So now I'm going to transfer hands, keeping that measurement with me. I'm just going to clean off all of those tips. And like I was saying, none of this is going to be incorporated into the head. This is just strictly collar. So then I want to set that in place, right like that, right over the top. Give myself a loose wrap, a second, and then as I start to work through here, that thread's disappearing. Check this, make sure that your length is good. My length's a little bit long on this, honestly. It is just a shade long. I don't know. I need to look at that. My tips are coming down right about at the point of my hook. If I take a straight line down, I'm right about at the point. I think I'm going to live with that collar like that. I could probably go just a shade shorter, but I mean, we're talking 1/8 to 1/4 of an inch, honestly, is all the more I'd probably shorten that up. So I'm going to leave that set how it is, and then, yeah, hook on the underneath side here. Make sure that you don't have any travel from your collar or anything going underneath and disrupting that belly. You got that nice cream tannish color that Sculpin are known for, and you have that mottled effect on the top. Then I'm going to take another stack of deer hair and I'm going to make a spin right in front of my cone head. So I'm just going to take a good chunk here, a little bit less than what I used for the collar. I just want to fill in this space in front of, or behind I should say, behind my cone head. I don't want this hair so compact in there that it's going to add buoyancy to it. I just want to fill in this gap with enough deer hair, but I don't want it so compact that, like I was saying, that I add buoyancy. So now what I'm going to do is just take this in my left hand. I'm going to clean the tips up. I don't want to be using any of the tips. And then that's going to allow me to find my center point on this bundle of deer hair. I'm going to clean that up with just a few wraps. Force that cone head forward a little bit. And what I may have to do, sometimes this will spin for you, other times it won't. I'm guessing because I have so much deer hair that I'm probably not going to get a good complete spin around that cone and my collar. I have everything pretty loose there. No, I didn't get a good spin. Yeah, I'm just going to back that off. I'm going to back that off. There's no way I'm going to allow that to work. What I'm going to do instead is I'm just going to stack smaller sections of deer hair. If I had a little bit more room there, I probably could have made that spin work. But when you get that little bundle of hair, that little tuft of hair, and then trying to spin hair in between that and the cone, sometimes it restricts it and it won't allow you to get a full spin. I had a pretty good chunk of hair there, so that's why it didn't allow it. So had to abort that one. So we're just gonna back up and do it right. So less than half of what I was using before. I'm going to start on the bottom on this. Once again, I'm just dusting the tips off of this. I'm going to set this on the bottom section. I'm going to capture that with my thumb and my middle finger underneath. I'm just going to make one wrap, two, and then a third. Pull that stuff down. I didn't switch to 200, so I'm not going to pull real tight on this because that 100 will cut right through it. I just want to make sure that my hair is, there we go, make sure that my hair is getting sucked up in that gap and then flaring between my body and that cone head. So now I'm going to do the same thing on the top. I'm going to take a little bit extra hair for the top section. Just going to clean this up just slightly. Like I said, just a little bit more hair on the top than I used on the bottom. Not a ton. And I pulled some out there. Just kind of stack that in my hand to get everything somewhat even. Once again, cutting off the tips. A couple of strands there that I didn't really like. Now, I'm going to set this right on the top using the same thread path that I used for my bottom section. We're going to go one, start to tighten down slightly. There's a second, I'm tightening down just a little bit more. That thread's disappearing, my hair's flaring. And then a third. Check this to make sure that you're going down in between, or that you're getting behind that cone head there. Everything looks clean as it sits. And then I'm just going to take and whip finish this right behind that cone. So now what I want to do is I want to trim this hair between my cone and my collar. I always start on the bottom with this. Let me get some of this stuff out of the way here. Like I said, I always start on the bottom on this. The tail's not quite as fluffed out as I would like it to be. I guess that looks better. I always start on the bottom. And I'm just going to find the bottom section of my cone here, and I'm just going to make one clean cut, pretty flat on that bottom section. Pretty flat. Work my way back into the Schlappen, and I'll clean that up a little bit better. I'll leave that go for now. I'll focus on that here in a little bit. Now what I'm going to do is go on to my top section. I'm just going to give my blade a little curve. There you can see what we got. And then make sure that my head's not in the way. And I'm just going to push this right through and I'm aiming for the tips on my collar. That's just going to ensure that I'm not going to get too aggressive on this first cut. As you can see, I mean, that's way too much hair right there, way too bulky, but I'm not going to gouge from this cone head all the way back and mess it up on the first cut. You tie all of this fly, you have everything sitting how you want it. You make one cut with the razor blade and you have to throw the fly away. Go and just get your overall shape that you want on that cone head, or off of that cone head I should say, and then you just work your way back. Like I was saying, when I first started that, I worked my way into the tips of the collar, and you can see how I have that setting right there. Now I'm going to go off of this side, and I'm just going to round this off, cutting down on the bulk that I have on this collar here. And that head shape is starting to, or that head's starting to come into shape for me. I'm going to take and just move this. Just going to use one hand here. It's a little easier for me to fine tune it just like that. Okay, so we're starting to get the shape of our head in here. It's still a little bit on the bulky side, but I have the shape that I want right now. So what I want to do is just grab this and go right over the top of that cone head, and I'm just going to follow that shape. I actually have my blade resting on that cone head as kind of my guide to go back to get my shape. Now I'm going to do the same thing on this side. I'm just going to round this off. I have that cone, or I have that head running back into my collar. And that's starting to look all right. I still have some stuff back here that could use a little cleaning. Yeah, I'm almost happy with it. Almost happy. One or two that are a little bit off. I'm going to continue cleaning this up here once I shut the camera off. I still have a little bit of work that I want to do to it. Just kind of getting things even. I'll pull it out of the vise and really clean things up with the scissors and everything. But there you can see from that underneath side, you're still able to see that pearl body just slightly. As this gets wet, it's really going to come through. It used to be when I tied these that I had too little of a gap, honestly, between my collar and my cone head, and it wound up being just too much of a transition between that cone head, and then it would just kind of go from the cone, it would almost go straight up, and I'd have almost like a perfect ring around there. And it wound up being too bulky, and I didn't have the shape that I have right here. This, you can see, the cone's almost an extension of the overall shape that we're after on that head. There's Allen key here. I'm going to turn this just a little bit so you can get a little bit better of a look at the profile on that head. That should do it right there. You'll be able to get a pretty good look at that. But that gives you an idea of what we're looking at on that profile or on that head. That's the shape that I'm typically after when I tie these. Some of them you'll see, like I said before, this is the actual head portion will be a little bit more compact behind that cone. I don't really like that. I like keeping that overall sculpin profile. This allows me to do that by just making that a little bit more rounded off of the shape of the cone head, if that makes sense. For the reasons that I was saying earlier about this as opposed to the standard Wooly Sculpin where it's just all deer hair head, I like the deer hair head a little bit better. I like the shape that I can get. I can make it a little bit more wide as well with just all deer hair, and you wind up trimming that hair a little bit more compact than you typically would if it's just a straight deer hair head. Now the reason for is, you know, we have to get a little bit more hair in a tighter space, and also you're trimming this down closer than what you typically would if it were all hair. So that adds just a little bit of buoyancy right there. That's a little bit more compact than I would like it. Being that it's body hair, it's still going to allow water to get in there and add with your sink rate. But at the same time, what we gain on buoyancy, we counteract with that cone head. If you find that your fly isn't getting down as much as you would like, either take a tungsten bead, throw it over the top before you tie your tippet on, or you can go with just straight tungsten, add maybe 25-30 thousandths under that cone head. That'll give you a little bit more weight. Just mess around with your weights a little bit depending on what you're using. Now if you're going a full sink line, just a straight brass cone head would work, and I would just go with all deer hair head depending on how fast the current is that I'm fishing, so on and so forth. But like I was saying, mess around with your weights and everything till you get the fly sinking at the rate that you want, you're achieving the depths that you want. It'll just take a little bit of fine tuning to figure out, you know, hey, how much deer hair do I need compared to the weight on the cone underneath it, so on and so forth. But that is Kelly Galloup's Conehead Wooly Sculpin. If you guys have any questions or comments, leave them with me and I'll get back to you. Thanks as always for watching, and we'll catch you next Wednesday.